The UPMC sports medicine experts in Central PA are here to help keep you in the game and improve your quality of life, no matter your age or activity level. Visit upmc.com/Central PA SportsMed to learn more.
Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Pennsylvania High School Football Report. Got to get that out, Dan. I'm Brian Linder here with Dan Sostek. Dan, we were going to come on here today and we were going to talk about 2025 kids since we just got through 2024 signing day, but a lot's happened. We're going to punt that down the road a little bit. A lot has happened. It's been a particularly brutal week for high school football here in Harrisburg. For a lot of people who listen to the podcast who haven't picked up on it, we are based somewhat out of Harrisburg in central Pennsylvania. And it's been a terrible past week or two for Harrisburg. And first of all, the terrible news starts with Torray Eden, or Torray Eden, but Torray is how it's spelled, Eden. 16-year-old linebacker for Harrisburg. He was shot and killed in Harrisburg over the weekend. And Dan, I mean, look, 2023 was about as brutal of a year for football as I can remember on the field physically. But we've had this continuing sort of theme of kids, and I know there were some kids, I think, out in Aliquippa, McKeesport, and obviously a lot of stuff's happened in Philadelphia across the past couple of years, and this heartbreaking trend of kids who get caught up in this stuff. And I don't, when I say caught up, I don't think he was doing anything wrong. I don't know the details of the situation, so I'm not suggesting he got caught up that he was doing anything wrong, because we know a lot of kids who weren't doing anything at all, going home. And now the young man's dead. It's really disgusting that this continues to happen. I don't know what the answers are for it. But is there not a breaking point for people to say enough's enough? As a community, let's do something. And it's like I said, I think it's been more prevalent in Philadelphia, but I don't know, Dan. I stay up at night thinking about these things, especially after I had a brush with death. You got any thoughts on this one, Dan? I said I didn't want to start podcast before with terrible news because it's hard to come up. I don't know if we're going to come up in this podcast, but I don't know if we're going to pull a nose up. But
Yeah, I mean, that kind of it's just, like any time you talk about, death in the community, stuff like that's, the real bummer. But I just think the amount of times we've come on this podcast and talked about a young person who was in their life suddenly, like someone who woke up that morning and was, just thinking about what they're going to eat for breakfast. It's really like it's something that I think you said it, but it's like you kind of get desensitized to it, and it's like we shouldn't really accept it as normal as it become, right? Like it shouldn't just be a thing that you kind of see on PennLive.com and you're like, oh, that happened again. It should be something that kind of shocks you and makes you sick, and I mean it does to a degree, but I think like it's one of those things that when you stop and really think about it, it just it makes you it really is like an existential issue. And my thoughts are with his family and the whole community and everyone that knew him. It's just awful. That kid should have had you know 70 years, 70, 80 years left of life. It's all gone.
yeah, he was 16 years old. I'm looking at his GoFundMe, and if you guys are interested in that, there is a GoFundMe up posted by his grandmother, Kimberly Allen. And the name is Torray, Torray Eden, Eden. I saw Coach Lance Dean from CD East made a post about him, so I know he's worked with the young man, and it used to play at East Pennsboro too, and called him Umpy. And Just reading his grandma's words about how, since he was a toddler, he was always kind of an athlete and really thought he would be a star, and now he's not going to get that chance.
Yep.
And we need leaders. People talk about politics a lot, and politics are so divided right now. One of my problems with politics is I feel like on both sides of that aisle, there are people who are not leaders. If your offensive coordinator says it's your defensive coordinator's fault and your defensive coordinator says it's your offensive coordinator's fault, you're probably not going to have a good team, right? And so here we are, and we got that going on. We need to come together, we need to come together as leaders. And it's a bigger picture there, because if you have some leadership, then you can start focusing down on these things and these needless tragedies, such as this young man's death. And as I'm saying this, Eric Epler is now joining the podcast. Eric, we're talking about Torray Eden, the young man from Harrisburg who got gunned down last week, 16 years old. And we're just talking about how it's just, we see it in Philly a lot. We've talked to those kids about what they go through. And, when you see these stories, don't misunderstand it. And Dan and Eric will tell you this. There are, and one of the reasons like I highlight it is because I know there are fantastic, spectacular kids at these schools in Philly. Before I got sick, I went up there and I was in West Philly with Tyke Smith, who's now getting ready to go to the draft, and he was telling me what you can and can't do. And it's not normal. Okay. To him and to them, it's normal. But to most people, it's not a normal way of living, that you can only go straight to school and straight home. And if you venture out, if you stop by the park at the wrong time, you might not make it home. And in Harrisburg, they're great kids. There are great kids over there. It's one of the reasons why, and we'll get in that in a little bit here when we get into the other news come out of Harrisburg, but one of the reasons why I really went over there and wanted to cover it, because there's great kids with great stories. And sure, there are some things that they shouldn't have to, account for at such a young age, but they do. And they got some great parents behind them, but still it's there. And now we have a young man again who this has cost him. And it's a tragedy, and we need to get this together. We need to quit saying we need to get it together. But I don't know what the answers are either. So Epler, you're coming a little late to this. Anything you want to add? Again, we got another tragedy.
Well, I think it sort of highlights too how important, scholastic sports are
Yep.
to these kids. You mentioned, you got to go straight to school, go straight home. A lot of these kids too, obviously, uh, don't have the greatest situations at home. Maybe both parents or a single parent, obviously works one job, possibly two, maybe even three to kind of make ends meet. So these extracurricular activities, things that sort of occupy, student athletes' times after school, are so valuable. And I think too, to a certain extent, well, to a large extent, when we see these budgets, these budgets for programs like Boys and Girls Clubs and things like that, sort of dry up or are lost. Buildings are closed. We had, a similar situation was in Harrisburg with we've had, these programs at the YMCA that were so valuable to some of these kids. And, we just saw, Malachi Palmer just, not too long ago was at his, recruiting thing where he chose to go to Maryland. And, he was in the gym, a small little gym, uptown for hours and hours and hours, sort of staying away from, you know, all the trouble. And so I think instituting a lot of these programs, the Police Athletic League was something that was lost in Harrisburg for a long time, and is now back and providing these kind of services and a place for these kids to go, and not only just to be together or to play basketball or shoot hoops or do whatever, but to be creative, and to kind of take your mind off of, some of the situations, the horrible situations that are surrounding them. So there's a lot of things that we as a society could be doing so much better for these kids. And I just hate looking at this cycle over and over and over again. And again, it's Philly, so we don't, you don't sort of feel like maybe we're that close to it, but then you see these tragedies in Harrisburg, and you just like this is our backyard. So something has to break here. You can't change it overnight, obviously, but something has to break where we're not reporting on these situations, um, these tragedies.
And that it doesn't feel as, you know, like you would think that something like this would be like the talk of the town for weeks, but we're just so used to it, you kinda just move on after a couple people move on after a couple days.
Yeah,
That's another scary thing about our country and where we're at. People are numb to awful things.
Yep.
That's scary, you know? It's scary. But
Yep.
don't be numb to this. Pay attention to this. We've had Keon Wright on here playing college football, and his mom, Star Wright, out in Philly, talk about things she did to protect her son and why she wanted him to go away from home to play. And had Philly kids on here talk about the friends they've lost and just name a long, long list. Um, so, you know, here it is in Harrisburg, so we've seen it, like I said, out in Aliquippa,
And it also is just a reminder to, like when we saw the news, I think we can all be honest that I don't think we necessarily recognize the name in terms of, seeing him on the football field, right? But it goes to show you when you look at those rosters, on every single team, like it's kind of easy to lose track of, you just see a name and it's just a bunch of letters on a piece of paper, but every single one of those names is a person, and I think sometimes you can kind of lose sight of that, and then when something like this happens, you realize you kind of puts all that into perspective.
The UPMC sports medicine experts in Central PA are here to help keep you in the game and improve your quality of life, no matter your age or activity level. Visit upmc.com/Central PA SportsMed to learn more.
So we had that news, and that was terrible. And then we're getting ready for signing day last week, uh, on Wednesday, and we're building into it. And then we find out more terrible Harrisburg news, um, that athletic director and head coach Calvin Everett had been arrested, facing a DUI misdemeanor charge after a traffic stop. The traffic stop apparently occurred on January the 28th. I guess he was charged on February the 1st. Um, Reading Christine Vendel's story, driving along Interstate 83 northbound, 4 a.m. Sunday, January 28th, near the Harrisburg Mall, pulled over. The officer said he heard a flat tire noise. So he wondered if he had a flat tire. It also says he crossed over the fog lines twice, nearly hitting another vehicle. The officer noted in his report, according to Christine's story, that Everett's eyes were red and glassy and he smelled of alcohol. He failed a field sobriety test, series of field sobriety tests, indicating he was impaired, police said in the affidavit. He gave a blood sample at jail to determine his alcohol content. He is now on administrative leave by the Harrisburg School District. When we reported this, guys, there's one thing first and foremost I want to say. I've seen a lot of responses from the community. And first and foremost, one of them was, well, one mistake, shouldn't kill a person, right? This isn't one mistake. Okay. He was in a Pennsylvania State Police report 2 years ago and suspended for 4 games over that. Now, wasn't a DUI, but still, it was a situation that you can go back and read up about that. We're not going to relitigate that and go over that. It was a situation that I think he eventually got resolved. He did it. He did his thing. And now here we are 2 years later, though. That's still fresh in a lot of people's mind, and we have this. 2024, guys. It's not hard to not get a DUI. Okay, there's Lyft, there's Uber, there's a lot of things out there. But I look at the reaction from the community, and I saw that, one mistake. Well, this isn't one. This is two. And why would we report that was another question. In fact, Someone who identified himself as a coach from the program said we were weirdos. I was a weirdo for reporting this. Weirdo. Okay. So when I came here probably 8 years ago, Epler, you'll remember, it was a different time probably for Harrisburg football. They weren't where they were. And I went out to Joe Heden's spring fling and they looked really, really good, man. And I talked to Cal and I talked to a bunch of his players and I come back, I was super impressed. And I have people in the community telling me, oh man, Harrisburg, they're going to mess up. You shouldn't cover them. I'm like, team's got something. And you were saying it back then too, Epler, because Epler and I actually pitched the same story about how they were about to turn the corner. And I think I ended up writing it, but we still pitched the same story. We're thinking the same thing. But aside from the talent, talking to the kids, I started learning the kids. And this was pre-Micah Parsons. And you start talking to them, and the Amir Wilkersons of the world and the Ronald Kents of the world. And eventually the Dante Kents a couple years later. You start realizing, man, they got some spectacular young men. There's something really good going on in this program. So we started covering the heck out of Harrisburg football. And Harrisburg football earned it along the way. We weren't giving them coverage. They were earning it too. And I personally packed my bags going through cancer treatment and drove to Akron, Ohio to cover them playing a nationally ranked team because it was the only way Harrisburg was going to have that story and have photos and have video. We couldn't afford to send a photographer and video and all that stuff. But I did my best on all of it because I wanted those kids to have that coverage they deserved. It was a big game. We've probably written, guys, do you think anybody's written more positive stories about Harrisburg on the planet than we have as a team?
Probably not.
No, it's not close. And none of us, when we saw the story, I can tell you guys the shock in our group text was like, no, we don't want to see this. Because when Harrisburg was making that rise, I think every one of us agrees Calvin Everett played a big role in that. And I think Calvin Everett's had a very positive, life-changing role for so many kids over there. When Micah Parsons did finally end up at Harrisburg, he credits Calvin Everett with helping him sort of change. Micah Parsons, he'll tell you, he admitted it in his pre-draft stuff to a lot of people. He did some knuckleheaded things, right? Some boneheaded things. We all do when we're that age. But he credit Calvin Everett with helping him kind of turn some things around. So we don't want to see that. But here it is. So why do you report it? That's one of the things in the community. And why are you a weirdo? Well, first of all, I know some of I know the coaches over there, and I think highly of them. And this one coach said that other coaches were saying this. And if that's true, that's sad because that's not the lesson the young men you're coaching should be learning. You got kids who are going to play Division I football. You got kids who are going to play in the NFL. Potentially. Elias Coke's pretty darn special. Okay. And you had some other kids who could go there too.
Kevin Brown.
And you sit there and you preach accountability and responsibility and doing what's right. You break it down every Friday, and Cal tells them, what does he tell them, Dan?
I mean, you hear from a lot of coaches, right? You hear, don't do anything stupid. You try to keep, and I think it's kind of that message, right? Now that the work's over, kind of make sure you keep your head on straight for next week.
Yeah, it's a constant message. And I've called Calvin and talked to him about when people messed up, and he's talked to me. I've called Calvin off the record and talked to him too when I saw kids maybe going the wrong way. Stepping outside the reporter box a little bit, and what could be done about that. Okay. And now here we are. Calvin's messed up again. Nobody wanted to see it, but he's a public figure. He's probably one of the most recognizable men in Harrisburg. You can't ignore it as a media outlet. And you hope that message, some of the messaging we've seen is not the actual messaging within the program. Because if it is, then we've lost the plot. Okay? We've gone from something that was changing lives to what's going on here. Okay? Because there's a learning and teaching moment in this, and that ain't it. I mean, I would have called Calvin an Uber to avoid this. And for any coach out there, would have called you an Uber. We don't like writing these stories. We want you to get home safe. But now it's the news. And it's hard to teach your kids accountability and responsibility and then turn around and point the fingers at us because of something we had nothing to do with creating. It's a learning moment. It's not fun. We didn't want to see it. You didn't want to see it. I'm talking about you, whoever's listening to this podcast is a Harrisburg fan. Harrisburg players, I'm sure they didn't want to see it. And now we don't know. He's on administrative leave. And, if that was some messed up messaging from a young coach who didn't know any better, that's one thing. And I'm hoping that's what it is. But that's prevalent. And that's the prevalent thought behind it. Then something's broken. I hope that it was just a young coach being foolish and speaking out of place. And I'm not going to, for you Harrisburg coaches who are listening, by the way, any one of you, Cal included, you're invited to come on the program. Let's talk about it. But I hope that that was a misplaced message. And I hope that this is being used as a learning and something that we can grow off of. Because that's possible. I would like nothing more than to see Cal pick itself up, and get going again, and have those positive things that have been happening in that program and that community that are so valuable continue to happen. But now we'll see, and that has nothing to do with PennLive or our coverage of it. We didn't suspend him. The we'll see is on him and on the Harrisburg School District. So that's where we are with it. I know I ranted a little bit, I guess, or rambled.
I don't have much to say about, kind of the moral stuff or anything, because I think you kind of hit, what needs to be said. But in terms of the journalism and the reporting, like, I think what people have to understand, people in the community have to understand is this wasn't even like, as much as we'd like to take credit for us as a sports department reporting it, it wasn't. To give you a little behind the scenes information, it wasn't. It was our news department that first heard about this. It was our news department that reported on the story. It's a news story. It was a news story. It's a news story because it's a school administrator, and so behind the scene, in terms of that behind the scenes things, it's not a sports department taking aim at someone. It's not. It's nothing like that. It's just it's how things work. It's you get word from the police department that big name in the community uh, had something happen, and then the news department is the one that reports. It reaches out to us, asks if we heard about it, and we have to do our jobs. I mean, and no one's happy about it, and it's not fun. Like this stuff, I'm speaking for me personally. I've been dreading doing this podcast all week because I don't want to talk about like we don't want. I don't want to make people in the Harrisburg community mad at it. Like I love covering games at Severance Field. I love covering those kids. That great kids. I love all the coaching staff is a lot of the Harrisburg coaching staff's super friendly, great to me. I don't want to ruffle feathers, but it's part of the job.
Literally, they've changed lives.
Yeah,
But
exactly. And Cal, like you said, Cal specifically, we're not making this out to be Cal is a bad person by any.
I took up for him back in 2022 because I know he's changed lives. But you cannot we have probably hundreds of headlines on PennLive about Cal Everett being great and good and the positive he's done. You can't tell for all the good headlines to matter. And he and I had this discussion. We had a long phone call before the season. Okay. And it really kind of went back to 2022, before last season. For all of the good headlines to matter, you can't hide the bad one, because then people say, well, what about this? Or, we can't believe what you guys are saying. Epler, you're quiet over there.
Well, let's start with, first of all, you're right. You guys are right, obviously, about, it's not just a need to report it. It's necessary. It's part of our job. This isn't the first time we've reported on a coach being charged with DUI. It won't be the last. So
I had
that's,
a coach in Nebraska message me.
yeah.
This isn't just a citywide, well-known guy. This guy's known from one end of the state to the other and nationally.
Yeah. Yeah. It's our job. So if people have an issue with that, I know people are passionate about coaches and players and their programs. I get that. So I'm not so worried that there's, a passionate tweet or two on what this situation is and how they're, upset with us. I'm not too worried about that because of that. The good part here, about Calvin is you mentioned a lot of it, Brian. I'm not going to go over a ton, but after his first year, I believe it was 2011. People were calling for Calvin's head because they were 1-9. But what most people don't understand, and through radio broadcasts and print, I basically was on record saying, listen, Calvin Everett's the right man to run this program right now. He's the right guy for the job. And he's proven that over the course of the last 10, 11 years. After that first year, he had to clean out a lot of riffraff. There were a lot of guys in that program that were bringing it down. They weren't doing what they were supposed to doing off the field, in the classroom and things like that. So that ruffled a tremendous amount of feathers inside the school and on the program. So he took that sort of lead and led them to this unbelievable stretch of football that they've been on. So I still believe to this day that he's the right guy for that job. I think he gets it. I think the kids really like him. I think he's close enough to them age-wise where he understands the situations and the problems and issues that each one of his players are going through. So that to me is unbelievable when you find that. I told you and I talked a little bit, Brian, yesterday about, I tried to think of another head coach in the Mid-Penn and the surrounding area that would be better in this situation than Calvin Everett. And I can't think of one. I just can't. So there's that. But to me, this goes beyond the football field. As an athletic director, you are in charge of not just football players, but every athlete, and you're in care of every athlete in that school. And obviously being an educator is another part. So you've got to be doing it better and cleaner than everybody else. Simple. And listen, does everybody deserve a second chance? Yes. Is Calvin's situation different? I think it is, because he's an athletic director also. And I think he needs to be held to a higher standard. I just believe that's the case. So I hope, like you hope, Brian, that this is something he can learn from. Maybe it gets him back on the field. For me to say he deserves to be the head coach again or athletic director again, that's not my place to make that decision. That obviously comes under the administration. But I think if you sat down with Calvin today and said, listen, you should have been doing this. This has to be cleaner and better than everything else. I think he would agree with you. No doubt he has remorse for the situation. But in the same respect, you got to be accountable. The same way he demands on his players and his kids from 2012 to when he got that program sort of moving in the right direction to now. That's something that he's preached. So, I mean, I wish him the best. I hope it works out for him. And there's some situations where I understand he has applied for a program while he's on administrative leave here. So we'll see how it plays out. But yeah, Calvin Everett has done so much good for that program and that school. Um, this is tough. This is a tough one.
I and again, people think when why do you share that story? Well, it's the same reason why when he was in the and I told Cal this in a conversation in 2022 when his name came through on that other issue. I could have handed that to Nebby. I could have handed that to Dan, young reporters. As a team leader, I grabbed it because I've written a lot of good about Cal, and I wrote it. But I tried to call Cal in advance, let him know, hey, this is coming. He didn't pick up the phone. You know, we used to have a really positive relationship. Um, and you would hope that things like this wouldn't affect it because again, this is not something we want to do. And at the end of the night, I will pray that Calvin keeps his job, and I will pray because again, I know that there are young men whose lives, literally their lives. We began this program talking about the tragedy of a young life being taken, but there's also a beauty in the young lives that Calvin has changed, his program has changed, and sent on a different trajectory. Um, and so I know that. So I'll pray for him to keep his job, and I want him to keep his job. I'll also pray for the messaging to not be, again, you hope that was just a young coach speaking out of turn. You hope the messaging is one of accountability, responsibility, um, for the young athletes over there who have the chance to do what some of the other athletes they had. And they're going to have a spectacular team, we think, next year. Okay, so I hope Calvin's on the sidelines. I hope they can get it worked out. And that's where we are with it, guys. We think a lot of the individual. Quite frankly, I don't know that we quite know what to make of the incident. DUI, is that the end of the world? No. It's concerning that the police report says he crossed over, and almost hit a vehicle. That stuff's concerning. 2 years in a row being in a police report is concerning. But the individual, what we know of the individual, we still value above that. But we can't ignore these things. We can't ignore it for all the good that we've written, and we'll continue to write about Harrisburg to matter. Boy, we've talked a lot about this, haven't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really one, and to be honest, guys, now stepping off the soapbox a little bit and all that, it honestly is really one where it's tough for all of us to wrap our minds around because there's a Calvin, I think we all feel like we know that's a great guy. Like I said, this isn't the end of the world. There's something he should be able to rebound from. You just hope that it hasn't piled up to a point with the 2022 thing that they don't give him that opportunity to rebound at Harrisburg because that would be a shame. Um, from what we've seen and the impact he's made previously. I mean, I spend a lot of time every day kind of thinking about what might happen and what's going to happen, and I hope for the best. Anything else? Anything positive we can pick this podcast up and leave on a positive note?
Your old Blake Hinson story is getting recirculated again, so there's that.
Epler, Blake Hinson, the Pitt basketball star. A lot of people don't know this, but in another life, when I worked in Daytona Beach, Blake Hinson was actually first. We were writing about him in 8th grade, and then somebody from Bleacher Report literally just saw his film and wrote about how he was like the middle school Calvin Johnson. And so like he went from like a local story to like overnight we woke up one morning and like people across the nation were like freaking out over his film because he was basically the size he is now, Dan.
Mhm.
He was like 50 pounds lighter and could run.
But then it's the thing that everyone says, right? All football players wish they were basketball players, right? And I think he took it to the nth degree, right?
He was very good in high school too, but it would have been interesting to see him stay as a tight end or a wide receiver because he was really good. But Epler, that's apparently one of my Daytona Beach headlines with my byline is now being circulated around by a Pitt beat writer or somebody like that. And then old Dan's out here tweeting it. And here
Yeah.
we are.
What's your freelance fee? Is it 25, $30? What are you getting out of this?
The Daytona Beach News Journal owns it. So
But about Blake though, because we've talked about the portal before. I tweeted it though. For all like the negatives of the transfer portal, I think he's kind of an example when we talk about kind of the positives of it. Was he was a guy that started out at Ole Miss. I think his coach left, and he left for Iowa State. Went to Iowa State, and the fit was horrible. And Brian knows how Blake Hinson plays. He just kind of shoots the second he touches the ball, and not every college basketball coach is going to be okay with that. So he literally never played a game for Iowa State. So that's two programs he kind of didn't fit in already. And in the old world, that's probably means you're going to JUCO or you're going to Euro League or you're going to the Czech Republic and playing in smoky gymnasiums. But with the transfer portal, you can go find a third school, and lo and behold, he's now a everyone in Pittsburgh loves himself some Blake Hinson, and it is funny you get like that rep when you transfer all the time as being some sort of bad egg, and everything I've heard about that kid is that he's the sweetest kid in the world. He just kind of marches to the beat of his own drum on the court a little.
you talk about those smoky gyms playing overseas. True story. I started the Midnight Basketball League in my hometown, Walterboro, South Carolina.
Ooh, I would love to see what those gyms look like.
We would play the first year we played till midnight. But I mean, I had a Mustang and I would load it down with 6 or 7 kids because I would go all over the county picking them up. But one of the kids I coached was a kid named Eric Sally. Became a really good friend with him too outside of coaching, and still am to this day. He lived right down the road from me. I was only at the time probably 4 years old. I was like 18. I was like 20, 22. These kids were like 16. And I'm coaching them and carrying them around. But Eric goes on to play at Claflin, which is right there in Orangeburg. He led Division II in scoring his senior year. Really good guard. So, but he's a little undersized. He's like 6'2", kind of like a shooting guard. But he goes and he plays in some European country, and I can't remember, but like he would text me and call me from there. And it was just the craziest. He was there for about 3 weeks and he came home. So it started out, and like he said he got there, they gave him like a cottage to stay in. And he woke up the next morning and the kids in the village or town had gifted him a goat.
That's huge.
He played for 2 weeks and they were playing in some town. And he said one of their centers got mad at an official. And he was like a Russian dude. He said he couldn't understand him. And Eric says he just pops the official right in the jaw. And he said, the next thing I know, people are coming out the stands with AK-47s. They get at the players. He's like, and I got on a plane and came back to Smoke, South Carolina.
I mean, that is exactly every time you talk to anybody that's played over. Like, I'm sure there are probably degrees of leagues like the top Euro League in Italy and France and things like that are probably
the top league.
When you get to those kind of leagues, though, that would be a really, I love me some semi-pro with Will Ferrell. That'd be a good sequel to semi-pro where Jackie Moon heads to semi-pro 2, like over in Europe or something. Because some of the stories you hear are like, and then you definitely hear about the crowds running into the field.
Sally could shoot, man, and he could jump out the gym. He could dunk. He was really kind of like a 6'2" shooting guard. And it's just weird because you
can make good money over there though. If
a high level player he was, but he was over there about a month, and he was back, and he's like it's the weirdest thing ever. They gave me a goat, and 2 weeks later, our Russian center punched the referee on the court, and there were AK-47s everywhere, and I'm like, I'm going home. And he never went back. So, but I know I got a Monaco jersey. And I didn't ask for it. We don't take gifts, but a kid named Eric Buckner, who I covered in high school, played for Bamberg Earhart. He sent it to me, and it's pretty cool.
Their jerseys are very cool over there.
He sent it to me. And it's
Monaco would be a sweet place to play basketball professionally. You just
Yeah.
live in Monaco playing basketball. That'd be the dream.
he just messaged me and was like, "Hey, what's your address?" And showed up and there's a signed Monaco jersey. Eric Buckner, I think he's still playing.
Nice.
And so anyway, hey, we've gone way off the beaten path. Anything else football coming up, guys? Anything positive? I feel like we started off with a serious convo about multiple things. We're ending on a little bit of a lighter note. Anything else? We're good. We got a podcast. We're going 40 minutes. Megan needs to get to her meet. She said 2:30. Our producer Megan. So guys, real quick, Dan, tell them how to hit you on Twitter.
Dan_Sostek.
At 3Jacker for me.
At Sports by B Linder for me over on Twitter or X. Check us out on PennLive.com. Don't at me with silliness. Okay? Till next week. We'll see you guys later.
Yeah.
The UPMC sports medicine experts in Central PA are here to help keep you in the game and improve your quality of life, no matter your age or activity level. Visit upmc.com/Central PA SportsMed to learn more.